Welcome to the CPM Customer Success Podcast, where we help Office of Finance leaders enable an exact solution to enhance their corporate performance without spending countless nights and weekends in the office. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Smetana from Nova Advisory. Nova Advisory is a 100% OneStream professional services diamond implementation partner. We help OneStream customers and prospective OneStream customers get the most out of their OneStream investments. For CPM customer success listeners, we now have a weekly email newsletter to keep you informed on the latest CPM customer success news. By subscribing today, we'll keep you informed on episode releases, including customer success stories, OneStream interviews, and capabilities to keep you up to date about OneStream's unified platform for finance. You can check that out now at Nova Advisory's website, novaadvisory.com/podcast, and subscribe to the CPM Customer Success Podcast newsletter today. Today we have returning guest, Dave Collins. Welcome back to the show. Dave is the Director of Strategic Alliances at OneStream Software. Those CPM Customer Success Podcast listeners, you'll recognize Dave, familiar face. Welcome back, Dave. So happy
Thanks,
to
Andy.
have
Glad
you
to be here.
back on the show. Awesome. So today we are continuing a series that we've held with Dave, where we've been covering OneStream's capabilities in the CPM marketplace as compared to competitors, other available CPM software products that are out in the marketplace. We've gotten great feedback from our CPM customer success listeners. This is really helping organizations that are approaching a really important decision on selecting a CPM solution that's appropriate for their organization, that helps them compare and contrast what's in the marketplace, really understand messages that can get confusing when you go out there and start to look at tools. So since these have been helpful, we are teeing up today's episode, which is OneStream versus Pigment. Pigment is a newer product in the landscape. They're based in Paris, in Europe, as I understand it. And as organizations start to look at OneStream versus Pigment, we thought it would be a great next episode in our CPM capability comparison series with you, Dave. So Dave, let's dive in and get right into our first question. So we've got our listeners, their CFOs, their FP&A leaders. I'm sure a number of them are just buried in spreadsheets and disconnected tools and systems. Can you describe some of the core frustrations finance teams are experiencing with solutions like Pigment in other lightweight planning platforms?
Sure, happy to.
What they're trying to solve for?
And this is going to sound a little bit like a broken record because I'll be talking through a lot of the themes that resonate whenever we compare OneStream to anybody else in the market. And I think first and foremost, Pigment's a fine product. The others that we compare against are fine products. You can do the job with them. You do them in a different fashion, and they may lack some of the niceties that OneStream has that will be eliminating some of the frustrations that were in your question. Two major things from my standpoint as it relates to Pigment and other products like Pigment: technical debt. So in Pigment, you're going to wind up much like an Anaplan or some of the other cube-based products. You're going to create cubes from a functional or from just engineering the way I'm going to store the data functionally by business unit and more across the organization. So with that, you're going to drive up technical debt. You're going to have integrations, synchronizations that you need to do. And of course, with OneStream, that was one of the first things we looked to eliminate. Our approach with extensibility, and I'll talk more about this later on perhaps, our approach was to come up with a way to model in a single application all the things you needed to do functionally, business unit wise, throughout the organization. And then on top of that, we can govern the whole thing, secure the whole thing, ensure the safety of the data, ensure the safety of the users, make sure that the users don't actually mess up anything, if you will, that would be valuable to the CFO and other leaders.
So Pigment, they promote themselves as a modern platform, and a modern planning platform is really the niche that I think that their founders have started to explore and approach. They've grown quickly as a result. But the marketplace feedback we're hearing from customers is they've really ended up building models that have increasingly grown fragile over time. So I'm kind of curious what your take is, Dave, and kind of what the dangers of, if you're relying on a tool like Pigment, what are some of the dangers or complexities that you could be introducing into
Sure.
your
So
environment as you
I
start
think
to scale?
when I hear that they're calling themselves a modern planning platform, I think some of that is because they're relatively new to the market. So one could, from a marketing perspective, define modern as new. I think when you look at how they do what they do, it really, and I saw one comment from a customer compare them to Excel on steroids. Anaplan's been compared in that way. TM1 was compared in that way. The reality is that their approach, very pretty front end to it, seemingly very flexible, where I can go and affect change tremendously quickly. But the other thing I was able to find in some of their own message boards was that their documentation actually points out, and I think you mentioned this in the question, that breakability, if you will. And one, a user, if you will, could easily break a model by going in to make a change to something with a very myopic view. I'm going to change this calculation for me, but it actually has a ripple effect for others, either users or functions within the organization. And the documentation basically says be very careful before you change something, before you add something. And so to me, that smacks of having potentially too many cooks in the kitchen and creating a lot of confusion from a calculation standpoint. And my history tells me that products like that usually have to either quickly respond and provide a governance framework, or they're going to really be challenged moving forward, and customers are going to be turned off by it.
Yeah, so on the surface, the temptation with Pigment is that it looks very appealing. They're touted as a beautiful user interface, probably demos really well, quick setup, flexible modeling. Why do you think companies are getting attracted to Pigment initially? And where does that approach have,
So
potential to
I,
really
I
break
think
down?
a lot of it has to do with very good marketing. We see this when we talk about platform. When we began talking about platform, suddenly all of the other products that we compared to in market started talking about platform, defined a bit differently, but they certainly use those same words. So they're A, they're new, as I mentioned a few moments ago. B, it's an attractive UI. They focused on UI first, more so than the back end from the sound of it, as you look at the message boards and the challenges and problems that customers are having. Our approach was flipped, where we spent more time on the platform with data quality and governance and scalability and modeling different types of data and so forth. That can be perceived as complex. However, the application front end for OneStream, when created properly, configured properly for the use case, can actually be quite easy to use. I think the modeling capabilities, the scalability challenges are generally going to be because it's a multidimensional structure. We've all known that, I'm an S-based guy from way back. Multidimensional data structures are great from a calculation perspective, but oftentimes you have to create multiple cubes because the dimensional model for one problem or one use case versus another can be quite different. The other challenge is that your ability to store data that's more list oriented is just not there. So you're going to have to support those cubes with some form of a relational structure or a columnar structure. And now you're getting into, again, more technical debt. You're having to engineer a solution as opposed to invest in a solution like OneStream that has already been engineered with all of those things in mind.
Yeah, and so as we see and kind of look at the evolution of the CPM space, Dave, you've got a ton of history, built a career in this. When you go from legacy point solutions to unified platforms like OneStream, how can you kind of compare for us how Pigment's approach to performance management compares to what OneStream delivers, and especially as it touches on things like how do you handle actuals, how do you handle consolidations, And then you've already hit on governance, but I'm kind of
Sure.
curious if you
So
could expand on that as well.
they're an FP&A solution. They're a cube-based FP&A solution. So when you look at performance management, which per Gartner's definition, although I think it's a little too summary, you have close, you have consolidation, you have FP&A, you have reporting, and some level of analytic capability, or the A and FP&A, the analytics in FP&A. So from an EPM standpoint, or a BPM or a CPM perspective, they're not. They're actually just helping to solve part of that equation, the FP&A side of it. So they can do some analytics, they can do some aggregation as opposed to consolidation. Consolidation is a fairly sophisticated process where you have to go through things like currency conversion and intercompany and all sorts of process, so that from a regulatory standpoint, you're providing the reporting to those regulatory boards that is necessary. It's mandated by law. So could I build something in the consolidation realm with an FP&A product? It's been tried. It can be done. It's extremely difficult to do, and you're lacking a lot of the fundamental capability. You'd have to build a lot of the capability elsewhere and then bring it into Pigment in that particular case. They've had partnerships over the years with consolidation tools. The challenge now is a lot of those partnerships have gone away through an acquisition cycle. So when we look at how we've approached it, again, it was building from the ground up, thinking about unification. So unification to me is the ability to bring all of those functional capabilities that are necessary in performance management together, but we're doing it in one application. Very important, because that one application is drawing data from underlying source systems, and I can extend into operational use cases in the same application. So it's not just an end of month process, it's a day by day process that leads up to the end of the month, and then to the end of the quarter, and then to the end of the year. And I can have all 365 days worth of data in there to do pretty sophisticated analysis, or leverage that to do a forecast for me. So that extensibility from a data perspective also blends into, if you will, a functional perspective. Our solution exchange, OneStream Financial Close, allows me to plug a solution into my application and immediately have a full financial close that includes account reconciliations, transaction matching. And that's software that is built on our software by us or by our partners. And there are, more than 100 of those solutions that I can just download and plug into the application. Many of them are free. So we thought through how to create an ecosystem, starting with that platform-based approach to that application, including the governance around it. And governance is certainly security, but it's also the ability for us to govern the workflow for a process, to ensure that when you all come in and say, hey, the leading practice for this process is X, Y, Z, or 1, 2, 3, you can actually create a workflow that guides the business user through that process and protects them.
Yeah, I'd love to kind of dive a little deeper on this one. So, Pigment, as you've touched on, Dave, it's really praised for its kind of our focus on its planning background. That's where it started. They tout and they're praised for modeling flexibility. OneStream built on a unified platform approach from day one, as you've described. So when we kind of think about, and maybe you can explain for us the difference between what flexibility means in theory versus when we actually put that
Sure.
in
So,
practice with the OneStream.
it sounds like we can't model in OneStream, and we can't. So extensibility, or our dimensional modeling capability, allows us to, as an example, for actuals, have one account structure by one product structure by another customer structure that essentially encompasses a dimensional model that is appropriate for dealing with data that is of an actual nature. You've got a lot more detail, as an example. Whereas if I'm doing a strategic plan, instead of using that very deep account structure, I'm going to use a summary account structure from the account dimension, the same account dimension that has the detail structure. So I have the ability to model by using extensibility to point to dimension by dimension the correct information for that particular use case. I can do that quickly and easily in a governed fashion so that I don't have to risk things we talked about in some of the earlier questions, a user going in and changing the model and then having an impact across the entire model. So a quick example, the extensibility modeling approach we have allows us to, say, acquire a company and in one scenario, model what that new organization might look like before we actually start to capture the data. So do a pro forma of the acquisition, perhaps come up with a couple of different approaches to how we're going to model that data. All of that's being done by a business user. And then we settle in on the one that we want. And maybe we want to keep what we thought might have been a good idea because as we're actually going through the process after full acquisition, maybe we want to retool the approach that we took to that dimensional model. So the stability of the data within the application becomes the key thing. Governance is going to control that, governance over the dimensional modeling capability and our ability to create multiple models within that same application. So we too can model because that's an important thing to do. I need to work out what my organization is going to look like next year or perhaps next quarter while maintaining the structure of the organization in the here and now. And then I want to be able to do compare and contrast to it. We've supported that for 13, 14 years.
So, as in the Pigment environment, companies have relied on other financial consolidations tools and reporting tools. You just touched on that. They've bolted on or stitched together other apps that maybe those companies have gone away because they've been acquired by a different organization. I've read some things, and I find this a little mysterious, but they are now claiming a consolidations capability. Don't know if that's real or not. Can you just tell us from what you've learned, Dave, just update on kind of Pigment capabilities and touch on how do you avoid financial system fragmentation by using kind of these point solutions and how does OneStream's unified model,
Sure. So
different? How does it
starting
solve
first
for
with
that?
OneStream. OneStream allows us to do all the things that Gartner talks about and more. I can do close process, consolidation process, financial planning and analytics process. I can do all the visualization and reporting, either internal or external, and all of that can be done with OneStream. We have 1,700 plus customers doing that. With Pigment being solely about FP&A, and they partnered with some solutions. Venom was one, Fluence was another that did close consolidation, and then you'd have to do integrations between the two. Anaplan is experiencing that now, no doubt, because Thoma Bravo, their owning company, also bought Fluence, and they're trying to connect the two of them together to have a little more full-featured performance management. You have silos within Pigment because you're going to have a multi-cube environment. You have no consolidation or close capability. I actually went and looked at their website again. I leveraged ChatGPT. I leveraged Copilot to ask questions to find out if it could find something that I wasn't finding. Nowhere within their site or documentation are they talking any more about close and consolidation. Will they do that at some point? Probably, because otherwise they're solely going to be about FP&A. And the minute that the Office of Finance starts looking at the needs that are more full featured across the realm of performance management, they're going to be either left out or there's going to be a discussion about technical debt that takes place. Their planning actually does have some AI capability, some ML capability that they talk about. I don't see a lot of use cases out there with success stories. I suspect it's relatively new. In our case, we've embedded AI. We call it finance AI from a marketing standpoint. And what we mean there is that instead of needing to understand how to code something in AI to produce benefit, we've already done that for you. And so much like the solutions that we have in Solution Exchange, there are AI-based solutions. We download those, we plug them into the application. And if we were doing a forecast, we'd point at the area we want to do a forecast on. We tell it to go get some external data that might be relevant on a driver basis, and then we'd let the model do the calculations, the statistical calculations to work out what the most efficient, what the most accurate approach to that forecast might be. And we have more than 100 customers doing it. We've been at this now for about 2 years. We're showing a tremendous amount of success. That's in the planning, budgeting, forecasting side of things. We've also introduced capabilities throughout the rest of performance management that are AI ML based, so that I can leverage something like fuzzy matching to do a data quality exercise. I can um, do anomaly detection either in reporting or visualization or in my account reconciliations, surfacing that in the reconciliation process, everything was going a long way for months on end. And then suddenly there was this major spike in something. Perhaps you should look at that. Humans would tend to miss that unless they were looking closely. So we believe we can use technology to take advantage of that data and point out things that should be examined.
Perfect. You've touched on data. You've talked about governance. I'd like to come back to data a little more detail, Dave. So when we talk about data integrity specifically, it's often overlooked, and especially in kind of newer planning applications or planning centric applications that are focused in investing in that kind of sexy UI like you're talking about. How does OneStream's data integration approach and data quality management approach help finance leaders just need to trust their numbers and do so in a way that an app
Sure.
like
So we,
Pigment simply can't do?
in looking at Pigment's approach, actually what they've done is quite good. They have direct connections to many of the popular sources out there. So do we. The challenge, as I see it, is that what we chose to do is ensure that the data that we're bringing in, number one, we're only loading it once, not multiple times. If I have a multi-cube, multi-application environment, I no doubt have to load it to each of them, perhaps in a fragmented fashion based upon what that cube is all about. Or I need to bring data into one cube and then start to push it all over the place. With OneStream, I load the data in once and then I leverage it. So when I bring my actuals in, I can immediately see the variance versus the forecast versus the plan versus the original operating budget and so forth. So the approach is different in that the data model is all unified. That allows us to load the data once and leverage it throughout all of the processes, if you will, within performance management. The other thing is that we have a data quality process. Now, we say that, what does that mean? Well, when I load the data in from the general ledger and then I load all of the subledgers in, those numbers need to equate. The subledgers generally are going to add up to what you have in the general ledger. If it doesn't, stop. We need to figure out what's going on, or we need to create an adjustment to take care of what's going on. Something like the balance sheet. When I bring the balance sheet in, if it doesn't balance, stop. So when we look at data quality, we set up a series of rules to determine, is the data coming in of good quality for the process that we're trying to execute, so that we don't go through a closed process, determine after the fact that there's a mistake, and then have to flag that with our auditor. That's something that, since Sarbanes-Oxley came about, becomes problematic for the CFO. So we recognize that. We want to make sure that we're actually taking care of that for them. Second, the platform is really built for scalability. So if I wanted to load data in at a transaction level of detail, BDO, for example, load in 10 million or more transactions every single day so that they can see what's happening at the client site with the project, with the resources assigned to the project. That is performance management to them. They want to see how the relationship with the client when it comes to the work product is performing, so that they don't have to worry about write-offs, so that they make sure that they have the right resource mix. How many hours are being spent? Is there a lot of overtime being spent? Perhaps I need to get more resources on that project. So that to them is performance management. And as I mentioned several minutes ago, as Gartner defines it, it's a little too summary for my taste. With OneStream, you can define what performance management is for you. And The platform allows us to go in every direction that you define, and it allows us to maintain the integrity of that data all in that single application.
Love the explanation. Thank you. So you kind of mentioned on when we talked about loading your example of loading the transactions and how BDOs loading up and looking at their project data. I want to explore the scalability and kind of the performance of the application a bit further. So we Nova has heard from former Pigment users that once their models start growing, where they start to introduce actuals somehow into the models or pull in multiple ERPs, their performance starts to degrade and they start to see some maintenance issues and that skyrockets. So how has OneStream been engineered to really handle that scale, to really handle global organizations without the compromise of
So
speed or
I've seen this
accuracy?
historically with cube-based solutions. You have to be careful how much data you put in the cube. It's similar to a moving exercise, right? So if I'm moving from one house to the next, am I going to pick up the house and move it, or am I going to pick up boxes and move the boxes? At some point, certainly as we age, there are only so many boxes you can move in one set, if you will. I used to be able to carry two or three at the same time. Now I find myself carrying one, maybe two, depending upon how heavy they are. So the speed, the degradation in speed is most likely due to the nature of the size of the cube. So as I put more data into the cube, it becomes problematic. I suspect that I wasn't able to find a limitation. I suspect there's a limitation to the size of the cube at some point that's coming into play. So that's one part of it. When we originally engineered OneStream, we thought about multiple EPM processes as we've talked about. So I can do financial consolidation, I can do FP&A, I can do reporting, I can do account reconciliations, I can do transaction matching, I can do workforce planning, I can do myriad solutions that are important to the Office of Finance or the Office of Revenue. Chief Revenue Officer is supported by one of our partners called Infinity SPM, Sales Performance Management. For each of those functions, I can also support massive data scale. If I need to get down to an invoice level of detail so I can do anomaly detection, it's there. I can support that. If I need to look at day by day transaction levels of detail and day by day weather to see if weather had an impact on somebody going to the store or using the app to buy something, that's there for me. And we're using AI against that. So generally speaking, from a data handling standpoint, we support from the top down dimensional models, relational models, columnar models, which is some technical jargon, if you will, but it's different types of data that are relevant for different types of exercises. That allows us to support large, complex business problems effectively. And large, complex doesn't mean massive company that's, $10 billion or in the Fortune 10. Complexity is typically due to the juggling act that you often find in these multi-cube scenarios where the cube can only be so big either because it's physically limited or because if I put too much in there, it gets really slow. So I start to apportion into separate physical things, and I have to make sure that everything is in sync. I have to make sure that if I change a calculation that is in every one of those cubes, that the calculation is changed in every one of those cubes. I have to make sure that when I'm bringing actuals data in, I'm bringing actuals data into each of those cubes so I can do the exercise and make sure that everything is in sync. That's really complex. And so that's why we took the approach that we took, unifying everything together into a single application with different types of data to support the different types of functions.
Okay, let's bring it back to customer success and transformation, really the whole theme of this podcast. So, I'm curious if you worked with customers who have taken a look or evaluated or even switched from Pigment to OneStream, and what are some of the aha moments they're having? What have they experienced when they make that
So in
transition?
most
What's
cases,
different for
there's a
them?
little bit of buyer's remorse. It's similar to going and buying a car. You kick the tires, everything looks great, the car's beautiful, and then wintertime comes, or you drive through some mud, and suddenly the car's not quite as beautiful, or you start to have some issues with the car down the road, and you have to take it in for repairs. During the demo, Everything looks great. It's beautiful. When you actually start to live with it, you begin to experience the things that we talked about. Engineering requirements because I have a multi-cube environment, lack of scale because I have a multi-cube environment. I can't have list-based data, so I have to have a relational data structure or a data warehouse over here to the side. I can't do close or consolidation, so I have to figure out what I'm going to do for that. So the clients begin to see the reality because now they own it, they're living with it, and they will often make the choice to look in a different direction. That's generally what happens as we see it. The other thing that we've heard as well is that it's very much a vendor based or vendor led deployment when it comes to building out Pigment and building out the original set of applications, set of cubes, because there are not a lot of partners around. Last count I saw, there's about 35, 36 partners that are certified by Pigment to actually do Pigment work. We have 270, I think, around the world. You guys are one of our diamonds. You guys are one of our best. And for the most part, I think it's 95, 96% of the work that's done, aside from work that's being done by the customer, is done by partners, not done by the vendor. The vendor should be here to assist, to enable an ecosystem so that you have scalability. I think those two things predominantly are what we're seeing when a customer moves to OneStream away from something like a Pigment.
You touched on solution exchange earlier versus kind of building apps from scratch. You just touched on a bit, I think. But let's maybe expand. So Pigment users, from what I understand, I've heard, are really, they
Yes.
end up reinventing the wheel when they want to expand their use cases. Things like CapEx, people planning. We've touched on models such that exist within OneStream Solution Exchange. So can you kind of touch on the OneStream Solution Exchange, how it was developed and built, and how that reduces the need for constant
And so our approach
reinvention?
from 2012, when we introduced then called the fish market, then the marketplace, now called Solution Exchange, it is a place where we will put solutions, and I define solution as a portion of an application or a function within an application like people planning or account reconciliations or transaction matching. There are more than 100 solutions in Solution Exchange that are built and maintained by either OneStream, and the majority are by OneStream, using OneStream. So we built the solution using OneStream. Could the client have done that? Could the partner have done that? Absolutely. We thought we should provide a way to capture something that was pre-built that could be leveraged again and again and again by simply importing it into an application. So predominant difference is that from the sound of it, from the look of it, with Pigment, had a great idea at this client, I built it, and if I'm the partner that did the build, I then go to the next client and I build it again, as opposed to our approach. Even with you all, you have your own accelerators, right? So you'll go into a client side situation, you'll leverage something in your library, maybe also from Solution Exchange, by simply importing it into the application, and you get the X% solution. You get time to value, you get that acceleration immediately.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Dave. So let's talk about the user experience and kind of touch back again on the user interface. So Pigment, flashy UI, that can be deceptive though, from my experience. So in your view, I'm curious, what separates kind of like a cool interface from what's truly unified in terms of finance platform, and how does OneStream deliver on usability and really that user adoption better than
So
tools like
I've often
Pigment?
thought that when it comes to an application, you should have the architect and you should have the engineer. And to me, the architect has a little more of an artful approach, whereas the engineer is making sure that everything is going to be stable and everything is going to be scalable. The architect is going to paint the picture. And with OneStream, you can start with a blank slate and build the interface that is relevant to that organization, to that set of users, or to a set of users within an organization. If the painter's not very good, it's not going to look very nice, right? So we've suffered that occasionally over the years where somebody painted something that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. They thought it was beautiful to them. With Pigment, you get what you get what they've created for you, and you can make some change to it. What we've done over the years is focused first and foremost on that platform to make sure that we could scale to the needs of the organization. And then in the last 2 to 3 years, we've now begun to focus more on the front end, on the UI, on the UX. We introduced a year and a half ago a Power BI connector certified by Microsoft. So if you prefer the experience of Power BI, so be it. Go use that. Everything that you need is actually built into OneStream, and you can paint the picture in OneStream. But again, I think you should have somebody that has some level of artistic ability so that they're creating an interface that is appropriate and makes sense for them. So when it comes to the beauty side of things, we can certainly create that if you have the right person involved in it. Um, with a lot of our solutions, there is a pre-built interface now created that is quite attractive, quite nice, and it's very malleable. We introduced something about a year ago called Genesis that allows a business user to make change on the look, the feel, everything about the application from a navigation perspective. They can introduce new views of data by simply dropping something into that palette and moving forward.
Yep, and you touched on accelerators, and Nova Advisory provides solutions like a dashboard with
Yeah,
customizable KPIs that finance exec can modify very easily and quickly on the fly to really customize and get their user experience to what they would like. It's very straightforward. But now I want to kind of come back. You had touched on AI earlier. I do want to come back to AI. It's the buzzword everyone's talking about. Pigments now, as you mentioned, touting some AI capabilities. At least they're advertising that they've got that. So I'm curious, from what you know, is it real? And once again, compare it back to OneStream's approach. OneStream's really incorporated AI into the platform. They've built agent models, as you talked about. How is OneStream's innovation different, and how does it avoid kind of losing focus on the core financial excellence versus maybe these AI buzzwords and agents that other
great question. So
platforms
what
are
we've done is
touting?
we've augmented the application with AI capabilities. On the surface, so we provide forecasting ability, agentic ability, and something called Studio. On the surface, forecast and agentic is available in Pigment as well. But given the fact we know that there are scalability issues with Pigment, I question how deep they can go with forecasting. Can I bring in weather report, gas prices, COVID indices, consumer price index, all of these external factors on a day by day basis, location by location, align that with operational data, and then affect change on my forecast by learning from why something went up and why something went down per the external factors on a statistically significant basis. Largest retailer in the world went from 93% accuracy, doing it effectively manually, people making decisions about what was going to happen, to 98.5% accuracy. They went from a 7-week process to a 1 hour process. So the efficiency and the accuracy is there. The efficiency is driven by the scale of the data. So from a forecast standpoint, scale of data is going to be quite important. Agentic. Agentic is actually built into OneStream so that rather than using a chat GPT or a copilot, and at some point we'll actually plug in OneStream agentic into those if you wish to use a different interface or unify on an interface. But our agentic AI actually takes on 3 different capabilities. There's a finance analyst that allows me to go and ask questions of the data. What was revenue on this day? What was revenue in this quarter in this region? It has a search capability that allows me to go and search through documentation. What's the best way for me to do X, Y, or Z? And then there's deep analysis that allows us to take advantage of knowledge clusters built into the OneStream platform. So I could put documentation in there, I can put contract information in there, I can put marketing documentation in there and search not just the data in the application, but all of the associated documentation that is there in support of that data. Studio, the last item that is part of our three-tiered portfolio, Studio allows us, much like solutions, it allows us to create a function that'll exist within a solution. So as an example, I might be looking at account reconciliations and I want to find anomalies. And rather than have a person scroll through lots and lots of data and look for anomalies, we use Studio to create anomaly detection for account reconciliations, or a matching capability. Or if I'm looking at a dashboard with a lot of information as to what happened in my forecast, with lots of this external feature-based information, I can just push on a narrative description and agentic AI will kick in, survey what I'm looking at, and then explain it to me because I may not understand it. So all of that is in support of what we're trying to do from a performance management standpoint. And all of that is built into OneStream. It's not a separate set of products that you have to acquire. You simply access it through the same OneStream application that you've been doing everything else in.
Wonderful. Appreciate the clarity. So let's help our finance leaders really future proof their solutions, their environment. So for a finance leader that's perhaps today weighing OneStream versus Pigment, what would you say is the most important long-term consideration they should start thinking about as
So
they
it
work
it
through that
really
decision?
it boils down to the three pillars that we constantly talk about with OneStream. It's the ability to unify all of the functions together into a single application. Why is that important? Well, it gives me one place to look. It gives me one place to bring data. It gives me one place to ask for a calculation and aggregation. It gives me one place to report against. It simplifies what can be a very complex set of separate applications or modules floating around in the Office of Finance. So unification is number one. Extensibility is number two, because we do not need to or want to stick at the summary level of detail. Sometimes I need to find out what happened on a particular day with a particular customer transaction so I can fix a problem. Customer calls me, they have an issue. I want to be able to quickly and easily get down into that detail so that I can affect change. And then finance AI. Finance AI, unlike AI, is built for finance. You don't have to code anything. It's out of the box. You plug it into the application, you take advantage of it. You configure it by way of, some drop lists and some radio buttons and that sort of thing, as opposed to having to create something from scratch. You don't need a different set of tools. It's all been unified into that one application. So you really should be looking as a finance leader at something that is going to simplify. We believe that unification does that. You're looking for something that's going to go beyond typical performance management. We believe extensibility is going to do that. And you really want to automate. That's what finance AI is all about.
All right, let's talk about success stories then. So I always like to do the before and after transformation stories. I love hearing OneStream success stories. Um, so do you have any examples of maybe a customer that chose OneStream over Pigment, or maybe a similar modeling tool as Pigment? What kind of results have they seen in terms of time savings, clarity of information, or overall
So I think
control
it,
and
it can either
governance?
be a switch or it can be, during a proof of concept process. We do a lot of those for customers. Um, so real quick on our sales process, we're very, very open in our sales process. In fact, many of our customers, the vast majority of our customers, volunteer to have a conversation with a prospective customer. There's a great big book of contact information that we hand off to the prospect when the time is right, when it's qualified, and allow them to reach out to whomever they like. Perhaps they find somebody who's in their network, if you will. So when we see somebody come to OneStream, first and foremost, there's a transformation team, a value transformation team at OneStream that goes and actually measures using a common set of metrics, the before and the after, so that we can track, are we actually improving things for our customers? One customer in particular, typically in that multi-cube environment, a lot of data management, a lot of technical debt, a lot of interconnected cubes. There were hundreds of them. If memory serves, about 275 different cubes in the application, separate physical cubes that all had to be maintained separately. That complexity actually led to a lot of additional cost. So there's the cost of the software, and then there's the cost of everything around the software to make sure the software is doing what you need it to do, and all the maintenance efforts involved in that. We don't believe that that's something that you should have to incur. So when a prospective customer is looking at cost, we need to make sure that they're looking at the total cost of ownership, the other third-party tools perhaps that you might have to purchase to make everything work. From a transformation standpoint, when they switched to OneStream, they benefited immediately from a single scalable application built using the platform, eliminated all the technical debt of the integration, the synchronization across 200 plus cubes. That unification also has a lot of built-in financial intelligence. So a lot of the things that they were struggling to calculate through some form of business rule already pre-built and part of OneStream. For example, doing an intercompany elimination is out of the box. We manage that relationship at the first common parent. That's where the intercompany elimination takes place. Doing currency conversion, we attach a currency to an entity. We attach that currency to the entity by the scenario. All of that happens automatically. As data loads in, if it's coming in on a balance basis, we also immediately calculate what the periodic data happens to be, or the opposite of that, because we're likely going to be bringing in data from the ledger systems in two different fashions. So that transformation to OneStream actually saw a lot of things that were just there out of the box that they could count on, because you mentioned early on they're a modern performance management tool. They talk about themselves as a modern performance management tool. I think of us as a progressive performance management tool. We used to do things by building a lot of rules back in the day. Now we don't, because we can be much more intelligent and teach the platform what performance management calculations, aggregations, functions need to take place as you're looking at the different types of performance management needs that the organization has.
Love it. All right. So let's wrap up with really a call to action. So, what's the first question the CFO or maybe a FP&A leader should be asking themselves if they're using or considering a point solution
So
like Pigment?
if it's Pigment or not, I think, and I mentioned we're an open book with regard to the sales process. You should be challenging each of your vendors on the enterprise grade stability and performance. So what's it going to be like? What are the limitations, if any? You should be sure that there's a data quality and governance process for not only bringing the data into the application, but also governance over what happens in the application so that you don't have a constant break fix sort of scenario happening. You should have that scalability in addition to that enterprise grade stability. You should be sure of where you're going to get implementation expertise. Is there an education process that's available to you? And you should be looking at market leadership and experience. 15 years ago when we were first born, nobody knew who we were. We had one client, Federal Mogul, which was eventually bought by Tenneco. Tenneco adopted OneStream as their performance management solution, but we focused in on that customer. And then we focused in on the next customer while we were still focusing in on the first customer. And we grew through quality of relationship. We made sure that the platform had all of the things that I just talked about, that we lived all of the things that I just talked about so that we would provide success to that customer, and that customer would want to talk about OneStream, which is the best possible situation for somebody like us who's trying to sell more. And then we started to take off. And we got ourselves in a position where we're now in the leader quadrants for Gartner 3-4 years running. That's all a good thing, but it all had to start with the blocking and tackling, ensuring that we had the right technology to solve the problem, ensuring that we had the right people, the right partners to assist in that, and then make sure that we're there for the customer and we're continuously progressing the platform for customer needs as they come up. adding AI, for example, 4 years ago was something hugely important for our customers today.
Wonderful. I think that's a wrap, Dave. I really appreciate you shedding light on the CPM marketplace, doing this series with us, and really setting our
You're welcome.
customers up for success. So thanks so much. Thanks for joining us for this episode of CPM Customer Success. Reminder to check out the CPM Customer Success weekly email newsletter to stay informed of the latest CPM Customer Success episodes and OneStream news. You can check that out now at the Nova Advisory website, novaadvisory.com/podcast, and subscribe to the CPM Customer Success Podcast email newsletter today. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week for another episode of CPM Customer Success.